Good morning and welcome to my talk, Iron Sights for Your Data. Before I start, I'll introduce myself. I'm Leah Figueroa. I have a master's in education and an ABD in research psychology. I've spent 13 years in data analysis. I've done analytics in government, higher ed, and some on my own just for fun because I like data. I'm also a fiber artist, and that's my baby, my one-eyed cat. Oh, sorry. Sorry, this is a Frankenstein laptop that we realized doesn't mirror displays. So anyway, but yes, that is my partner in crime. He apparently also likes data because if I'm working with something, he'll come and lay across my lap but won't touch the computer. Okay, well now straight into my talk, and you can reach me there. I'm on Twitter. So where we are. So everybody heard about WannaCry, right? Unless you're living under a rock. So that's one of the big ones, but there are always security incidents and data breaches. I mean, they're super common, and people don't realize that the number of them that hit people because a lot of companies don't perform responsible disclosure, or they wait to release information until they've done everything, which can take years. In 2016 alone, there were over 64,000 security breaches that were actually reported or cataloged. And 3,100 of them were confirmed data breaches. It can't possibly be that bad though, right? Nobody's really impacted. So this is 2016 year in review. Come on. So January, February, March. And just as a side note, if you have Blue Cross Blue Shield, you may want to contact them to make sure that your data was not involved, because in 2016, over 1 million participants had their data breached, and PII was leaked. And take in mind, these are only the largest data breaches. And the only largest verifiable. There are more that weren't verified. So, it's bad. So what the hell do we do? Well, we can run around and scream, which, you know, is useful, or you can actually weaponize your data. And I'm pretty sure most of you are here because you're interested in that side of it. So, the underlying philosophy behind weaponizing your data is past behavior often predicts future behavior. In other words, people often repeat the same behaviors. And all of the data breaches and security incidents aren't some rogue AI that's left its creators and going off and doing its own thing. There are people behind it. And that's what this pertains to. So basically, what the heck does the psycho-mumbo-jumbo have to do with hacking? Past behaviors, data breaches, attacks, threats, vulnerabilities often predict future behaviors. Many of the tools that are used in current data breaches or security breaches or anything like that are tools that have already been created and are just effectively tweaked. One of the interesting things is the Google worm that was out a few weeks ago that impacted a lot of people. Well, all of that stuff was in GitHub, and it looks very similar to the MySpace worm. People don't usually create new things. They find something that works for them and iterate on it. So, how do I weaponize my data? So before you can weaponize it, you have to understand your data, and you have to approach it. And it's a two-pronged approach. There's data mining and predictive analytics. How many of you have spent any time actually doing real data mining or predictive analytics? Got a couple of you. Sorry, most people look at me like I'm speaking Latin when I ask if they know what data mining is. So why should we bother mining our data? Why should we use predictive analytics? Well, honestly, Big Brother does it, and you should too. Even if you're not on Facebook, you do realize you have a shadow profile, right? Everyone who's involved in your life that's on Facebook, they can use that to sort of plot. So if you ever show up, you'll get all sorts of suggestions and something without even adding any information. So if they're doing it, you should be doing it as well because it is important. And more seriously, why bother? Well, forecasts can predict attack surfaces, vectors, and actors. They can actually help reduce what you're trying to watch. If you have a giant attack surface that you're looking at, forecasting can help you minimize the man hours instead of having to, have someone on call or have multiple people on call all of the time. You can focus what you're looking at into a smaller area. Basically, there's too many breach reports, and there's not enough time for you to go through all. Too many ice giants, not enough Norse gods. And it's not perfect. Using data can put you in a much more defensible position, and it's an ongoing process, though, that requires a team effort. This is not red team versus blue team. This is blue team setting it up and red team helping. Because without that team effort, it's going to always be a fight. And it's always going to end up with the blue team being the firefighters and the red team going, ha-ha, you suck. So overall, the process, in the end, this means you can fight back effectively. You may always have fires to put out, but it's a lot easier if it's a house fire instead of a national forest burning. So, but I have one of these awesome tools. I have fill in the blank. You can and should use them, but only after you examine and understand your data. When you put garbage into a predictive analytics model, you're going to get garbage out. And it's going to tell you, you know what, you really, really need to protect your point of sale merchandise system. And you're like, but we don't have a point of sale system. The thing is, if you don't clean it up, it's not going to help at all. And the other analogy is using a fire hose to fill a shot glass. It's not going to work. So properly weaponized data is actually a feedback loop. You start with the data collection, you mine it, you use predictive analytics on the data that you've collected, and then you use it to predict your forecast. It doesn't stop there. Most people are like, we forecast this is going to happen and walk away. Once you have the forecast, you continue to collect data to refine your model. It will never be a perfect prediction, but it will allow you to reduce the workload, and it will allow your model to meet your needs because it's focused on your specific data. Oops, sorry. Okay. So before you start, you need to have a good framework for collection. A lot of people have a bunch of logs. They don't really use it. They collect reports on everything that goes on, but they end up with logs and nobody who can read it. The first thing you need is a good framework that includes incident tracking, victim demographics. That's really important because a lot of people overlook that. You can actually use that to, sorry, it keeps making a weird noise. You can actually use that to focus your model even more effectively because sometimes you may not notice a pattern in all of the other incidents, but the victim demographics will lead you to a pattern. It's, for instance, elder abuse, when people start using to scam older people. You may not notice a pattern because it's all over the US and it's all different things, but then you notice that the victim demographics are all 65 to 75 with this particular insurance company and things like that. And it will allow you more insight. You also need incident description. I've read some that said, we got hacked. That's not really helpful. What does that mean? Discovery and response, what happened? What did you do to alleviate? Because sometimes when people respond and they fill out the reports with what they did, they basically slapped a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, gushing blood. It's not going to do anything. And impact assessment. That's also very important because if certain things were breached, you can always find where it overlays other areas. If that's not included in your framework for your data collection on an incident, you're going to miss some areas. So a framework that I do like because I'm a data person and I like things in nice, neat little boxes. The Verizon Verus framework is a very neat one to use. You don't have to use theirs. You can actually pull down their framework and build your own. You can ask your DBA for help in building a framework for incident response. If they have no idea what they're talking about, you should go find a new one. I'm serious. Just put them in a cubicle, let them do some data entry, and go find a new DBA. If you are very uncomfortable with the idea of Verizon, because let's face it, they are kind of jerks sometimes, you can use less Verizon ones. Cert Insider Threat Database is also good. Their factor analysis of information risk, fair. National Institute of Standards and Technology Risk Management Framework. I'm not sure what they were going for with that giant name. Octave, SANS 20 Critical Security Council, Threat Agent Risk Assessment, or you can build your own. Just as long as you have the basic things in there in a way that you can use it in a data model, then it's perfectly fine, especially if you don't feel like using something or you want to build something open source. Now, before you, for data collection, you need incident reports, which provide data for trend analysis. You need system logs, which provide data for broad analysis, and you need application logs, which provide data for focused analysis. All of it provides data for analysis, and, you know, a lot of people complain about data collection, but the more you have with regard to security incidents, the better your model will be, and the better you're able to predict future incidences. There's a bunch of tools to help you with your data analysis, or to actually extract the data. You have Logstash, which is free and flexible. Splunk, which is costly but very powerful. And if anyone wants to sponsor Splunk for me, I would happily accept. There's also Security Onion, which is everything and the kitchen sink. When in doubt, ask your operations if you're working with a team, or just go ask someone. Go poke your local friendly hacker. Hey, what kind of stuff do you like for logging? Ask. This is a team effort. You may have someone who's in your data team who just uses these tools because they like to catalog data. There are people like that in data. I know some of them. I work with someone who does that. Data mining and predictive analytics are sometimes used interchangeably. You'll actually hear that a lot of times in journalism. I inwardly cringe when I see that because they're not. The data mining produces decisions based on normal reports. So basically you're said, all of this says this. Predictive analytics use what all of this says this, and this is what I think is going to happen based on all of this. And this is basically how the predictive analytics process. It's still within that framework and it's still a cycle, but you define the project, you collect the data, you do the data analysis, then you look at the statistical model that's created, you model it further, and then you deploy or they call it deployment in data, but it's not a deployment like you visualize it. It's basically us showing you what's going to happen or what we think is going to happen. Once you have that deployed, you can pull that back into the model and start all over. There's never an end to this, which is a little disheartening, but it's always really interesting because there's always a story behind all of this stuff. And data mining finds valuable information. So the data mining process is actually 5 major elements. The ETL, you need to store and manage your data. Please store it securely. Please store it securely. A lot of times people think that the only data that needs to be stored securely is PII, but it's not, because things that you gather from security incident logs and things like that are actually gold mines and can be used for other information. You also need to provide adequate data access, have someone who can analyze the data and someone to present it, but most importantly, you need to use it. There's also different levels of analysis. So you can do surface level, you can do deep levels of analysis. It all depends on your needs. And I apologize for the flip back and forth. So, now, predictive data analytics, which I'm sure if you've ever used any of it, you're like, oh, they're forecasting that this is going to happen. Weather forecasting is the poorest model of predictive analytics that I've seen, but it is a representation in our daily life. Also, when you see things like your taxes are predicted to be this in the next year, you know, anything like that is predictive analytics. People just don't realize it's very prevalent in our life. So a lot of companies use it in sales and things like that, but you can also use it here in security. Basically, you extract data from existing data sets. You identify trends and patterns. You improve performance. One of the good things with predictive analytics is the more data you have and the more times you've gone through the iterations, it actually improves the performance of the model. You can actually use it to drive strategic decisions because you can actually pull something in instead of saying, hey, look, I've been in security for 10 years. This is something bad. You need to do something about it. And your CEO looks at you with glazed eyes and said, well, you don't have any proof. Well, this kind of predictive modeling and the data you can get out of it, you can say, hey, look, dude, this is going to happen in a couple of months if we don't do something about it. It provides you with tools to make your job better, but it also makes you better. You can actually predict future outcomes, trends, and behaviors. And it's not an absolute science. That's imperative that people understand, because a lot of times they take predictive analytics as, well, you said this was going to happen, and that's why it's predictive. Oh, sorry. Okay. So this is a good predictive analytics model. It's time because nothing stands still. You have reporting, analysis, monitoring, and predictive analytics, which feeds into... Okay, sorry, it went black on my screen. Which feeds into this model. As I said before, it's a continual process. It will never stop, but it will improve. So I'm hoping in 50 years from now, predictive analytics will have a variance rate of 2% versus a variance rate of possibly 20 right now. Okay. The predictive analytics model also allows models to be created. And the interesting thing is it allows you to refine models. So you can continually correct your model. It's not a be-all to end-all, like, this predictive analytics cycle has ended, so we're just going to wait and start a new one. And that's not what you do, because your models will never get any better. Once you create a model, you continue to feed data in it and cycle it through. At some point, you may need to change to a new model because you've changed owners, their threat actors have changed, or something important has changed. But don't ever discard your old models, because they can be useful. And as you can see here, this is an example of the forecast, the prediction, and what actually happened and how you correct it. So before you begin, you need to select a tool, learn to use the tool effectively, and use it in the feedback loop. And you don't have to be perfect at any of these tools. If you don't have anyone to support you in your work, you can learn all of this stuff. The tools that I'm going to list are actually pretty user-friendly. Yeah, I know. It got angry at me. Sorry, hacker gods. Basically, the best approach combines both data mining and predictive analytics with a big friendly GUI. I know a lot of people live in the command line. Trust me. With analytics tools, like with this predictive analytics, you don't want to live in the command line. Trust me on that. I play around a lot in the command line with my tool of choice, which is R. But it can get really messy really quickly. With a GUI, it actually allows you, especially with very large models, it actually allows you to go back and correct it. And because, like writing any other program, there's going to be a mistake, and you're going to write it, and you're going to be like, it ran perfectly last time, and you're going to get really mad and walk out, which is what I do on occasion. So anyway, there are tools that you can use, enterprise tools such as IBM Predictive Analytics, SAS Predictive Analytics. Both of those can be very nice, but they're very pricey. The open source projects are R, which is free, Weka, which is also free, NIME and RapidMiner are open source. They cost, but they don't cost the same as IBM or SAS. So if you are in a instance where you don't have a lot of extra overhead, one of the open source projects can help. R is the one I prefer. It's a very robust program. People are always creating modules, and it plays nicely with all the OSs. They also have a very nice GUI called RStudio, which is also free. They have a fancy version that you can purchase. You can get an RStudio server, but if it's just you running this stuff, you don't need it. Like I said, R is big and friendly. Has a nice GUI. It's command line driven in the GUI, so you can use your command line, but it still lets you see what you're doing. But yeah, choose a tool. Okay. So this is predictive analytics for the blue team. Sorry. Come on. I'm having a hard time seeing it on the screen because my computer has decided to be a jerk today. Okay. I'm going to fall off the thing. Okay, there we go. So this is basically predictive analytics for the blue team. It just shows the feedback loop. It's the basic predictive analytic model from before, but it's just skewed slightly for use in the blue team setting. And this is not, like I said, it's not blue team versus red team. You need the red team's input. Especially if you've been busy fighting fires, sometimes new incidents will come up that you don't know about because you've been so busy putting out a large fire. you need their feedback, and you need them filling out those reports for your database response, your big data response center, because that stuff is valuable. Get your pen testers who are your internal pen testers to also write up really nice reports and put them in there, because that will help you as well. Okay. Now, remember those front-end tools used, you talked about earlier? Kibana, Splunk, Maltego, Palantir, Graphite, Graylog 2. You can use all of those now because your data set has been cleaned in mind and you have a model in place. You can actually use it to create fancy, easy to read and easy to use things to pass out to people who may not understand what you're talking about. You can also use it to share with other members of the team, if you're out doing presentations. These tools also allow you to do some nice things without showing any of the back end to people, because security information is very important. Now, before, I know someone's going to ask me, do I have a proof of concept? No, I do not, because no one wants to give me their security data set in order to play with. So I can't show you what a proof of concept would be, because anything that I do with a regular data set won't really show anything, because it's not tailored to a specific set, and it's basically worthless. And so I'd put in hours creating a data model that would tell you that I could create a data model, and it wouldn't really tell you anything more. So anyway, does anyone have any questions?
Which tools do you prefer?
I use R. I don't have the back end or overhead to purchase any of the large tools, so my tool set is all open source. I do work in an office with SAS, and I prefer R to it. SAS can be very useful, but it's also very prohibitively expensive, especially for small companies.
What's the learning curve on R?
If you can program, you can usually learn R. It's fairly straightforward. The only thing is it can be quite frustrating in that it requires multi-steps to get what you want. But using RStudio or anything along those lines, basically RStudio is a nice GUI, and it actually highlights where you're having issues. And R is such a robust and well-supported open source data project that you can basically put in almost any issue. I have yet to run into an issue where I have not gone and looked for community support and found an answer to my question.
I just set up 9 this week.
Okay.
I thought it was impressive, the examples.
Yeah, because of cost constraints, I tend to work with open source. I've also found issues with some of the larger enterprise, because since it's not, you don't have as much community input, sometimes the models are not as flexible, so it's harder to get it to do what you want it to do.
About Panda, have you experienced that?
I have not had any experience with it. Okay, Panda, like the bear?
Panda is big. It's like a Python bear.
Okay, yeah, no, I haven't used much of that. Like I said, much of my background is in R, just because it's easier to use. For me, I tried to train the rest of the office in using it for text analysis, because we were doing basically a qualitative analysis, and I wrote up a 14-page guide with pictures, and they still didn't understand it. So.
Are you doing any models with various databases together, like people-based databases?
Not yet. We actually, we didn't have the server capacity at the time, but a friend of ours realized what I was doing with my research on and walked over a Xenon server and said, here, you can use this as long as you want. So we're just getting that set up. I do another talk basically on OSINT and student data, and so I'll actually be using some of the R and predictive analytics to kind of see if I can pull anything out of it. Any other questions? I do. There's not much in it. If you tweet me, I can get it to you. I'm going to start putting things in it. One of the, I guess, hardwired into you when we work in higher education, sometimes they don't really like, unless you're in InfoSec in higher education, they get really weird about you doing projects. I guess everyone should be in a box, and they don't really understand that the most effective teams have people who can work across the teams and things like that. So I'm planning on putting some of this in GitHub and working on getting it more robust. I guess I've gotten to the point where I don't think that we should keep everyone in boxes, and that, people need to stop using data for nefarious purposes and try to use it for good once in a while. So, yeah. Are there any other questions? The which one? Oh, here, I can pull it back. Yeah. Sorry, I have the screen mirror. So for some reason, my laptop does not support. There we go. Yeah, and honestly, if you have a good tool, so R actually supports, so like let's say that you're getting set up and you just don't have the time or the money or to get into the setup, you can set up a data tracking, incident tracking in Excel. I know that sounds horrific, but you actually can, because a lot of good programs can actually read from CSV files or from Excel files. So for instance, R can actually read from text files and Excel files. So if you can't train your pen testers to put something in a tracking report, you can actually have them just put it in a text file. And it'll read it into, but you can use a variety, as long as it lets you collect your data in an orderly fashion. A good analytics tool will let you put it in anything. Well, it will let you put it in anything within reason. No. Yeah. Or if you can just train, if you have people who refuse to fill out the forms, if you can get them to send an email with that answers all these questions, you can just pull it into whatever you're using, and that will help your model. One of the big things is if you're blue teaming and you're using data for it, you need to get your red teamers to provide, even if they're like external red teamers, or they're, you have pen testers who are going out and about, get them to at least provide the basis of the information, because stuff that's attacking one place, especially if it happens more than once, is probably going to hit you at some point. And people forget that outside data, like outside people, your company may not be hit at that point, but at some point it will. Blue Cross Blue Shield got hit 7 times last year. You would think they would have figured it out the first time, but the data breaches were basically the same thing. And people's PII, health status, all of that got leaked. And it's just, there's so many ways that data can be breached and people don't even realize it. And a lot of companies often don't want to acknowledge that there was a breach because it can adversely impact them. I think responsible disclosure of a breach actually allows people to be more, a lot more safe, and it allows your internal security team to be prepared instead of getting hit with "we got hacked, it's your fault," and you're like, "But you're the CEO and all your passwords are admin." It's not my fault that you decided to download the entire patient history onto your laptop and then take it on vacation in the Bahamas. But seriously, like, honestly, that sounds funny, but a lot of times you get someone in a high position who has a history of losing laptops with PII and stuff like that. If you have that in the data model, you can actually do stuff and say, hey, I know you're his admin for, Mr. President, whatever. You're his admin, and he's lost 4 laptops with information that we've had to clean up. So on his next vacation, can you please put in a work order and pull that laptop and have it be worked on while he's on his trip? You wouldn't have looked at that unless you had some kind of predictive model, because that's sometimes one of the biggest threat actors is your own internal upper people, because they're under the assumption that they run this big company and that they don't have any problems, and so they will be fine and no one will do anything. And usually they're the easiest ones to hit because they're the big. And they're too important to remember passwords, and they're too important to use password managers. And it kind of goes on and on like that. So. Also, you can use things, you can even use this kind of stuff for, the door scanners. So if you have things happening, you can actually look at your door scan data, and if you see, say for instance, someone has got a hold of a cloner and you don't know about it, but all of a sudden the same ID badge ID comes in 17 times within an hour, that's not someone going in and out. Unless it's a delivery driver, if it's someone who's supposed to be sitting in a meeting, you can actually use that data to start pinpointing, okay, someone is doing this. Let's look at the video logs. Let's look what's going on. We're losing data somehow. And a lot of times people don't think about that, but this actually allows you to analyze physical threats in addition to like just regular security threats. Because let's face it, people are the biggest problem in security. And so it allows you to do things like that, or it allows you to watch like someone's VPN in the middle of the night, and that's when records are being accessed that they shouldn't be. Well, if they have a legitimate reason, then okay, that's fine, but this will allow you to see like, hey, someone had a legitimate reason once, but why are they doing this every night, you know, for 2 weeks on, and then they stop and they do it again? There's no reason someone needs to be a VPN into their whatever security set that they use. So, for instance, at one point I worked with Medicaid data. And so anyone who had ever applied for Medicaid in the state of Texas from the 70s until the current time period, I could access all of their information, including social security numbers. Because I was using their data, because we were using it for, you know, predictive analytics, we were using it to determine where the money was going, things like that. Well, if I decided that, you know, I have all this access to all this data, if I decided in the middle of the night that I want to start looking at that because I can start selling social security numbers off to people in other states, you can actually use that to trace the leak, because I've done everything within my bounds of responsibility. But if you're not looking at that and you don't have something that, you know, to help you with this, because we actually had an incident of that, of someone pulling some social security numbers and they had no way to know who it was, which is that's so this is part of the reason that I really think that people should start using their data to help protect the company, help protect themselves, also make your jobs easier. Because if you're on the blue team, I know how stressful that can be, especially if something gets hit or something goes down. Because I'm married to someone who used to be a sysadmin, who would get called at 3 o'clock in the morning when everything went down. So that meant I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning. So this is slightly selfish on my part, but honestly, this data really we need to start using it, because people are using it to do some really crappy things to kids. They're using it to do some really crappy things to the world in general, and you guys need to start using it to fight back.
One has the developer license, usually.
Mm-hmm.
Like 6 months. I think you get either, I've seen 10 or 50 gigs that they have and got it.
I'll have to look into that.
It might be something for people at home that if they want to more than 500 megs.
Yeah. Okay, I'll definitely look into that, because I've been wanting to play around with it, but we can't even, you know, asking for, in higher education, asking them for tools like this to play around is like asking for them to buy you a Rolls Royce. You know, they kind of look at you and giggle, and then you go back to your to your desk, and you know, yeah. But okay, Splunk Enterprise, yeah, and developer license. I'll definitely look into that, because I've heard some good things. There's so many tools. I do focus a lot on open source because a lot of people can't afford the. I think we currently pay at work for 10 licenses for SaaS. I think we pay $35,000 a year. And we're upgrading, which will cost us $50,000 for them to come and migrate our server, because they won't let us do it. So yeah, so I'm a big fan of open source, even if you have to pay a little for it, because usually open source is not, they let you migrate your own servers, and they don't require someone to come in and go, you need 117 gigs of RAM on your server, and we all went, what? So, anyway, any other questions?
What are you using for your data cleanup? What are you planning on doing
I
that?
use R, because R has a lot of data cleaner. One of the things is you have to load a bunch of things into the R setup in order to use it, but it does help you clean things up. And it'll let you display things, so before you start cleaning, you can look at it. You can do manual cleanup, and I encourage anyone who does any type of data cleanup to actually do some manual spot checks and manual cleaning on your own, because if you're just allowing, letting all of the automated tools do it for you, you're not going to catch some things. The human eye is much better at picking up patterns and things like that than AI systems. And so you can actually, this will also allow you to maybe notice if someone is just entering BS data into your system. You may be able to catch, because I know enough people that would probably do it for fun to see if you'd catch it. And so it'll allow you to kind of spot check to make sure people aren't just doing things to mess with your data because it's funny. Any other questions? Oh.
So R is the middleware, but it's the front end and the middleware?
Yeah, R will actually, so R itself lets you do a lot of things. R Studio is a nice GUI that sits in the front that actually lets you do all sorts of things. You can do predictive analytics. You can actually spit out the charts and everything else. It requires a little bit of tweaking, and it requires a little more interaction than, say, some of the other software that costs money. But it is free, and there's so much support, and people are always creating modules, and the community tends to be very friendly and helpful, as opposed to some of the other communities I've seen that may not be, they're a little saltier. R tends to be a very, I call it more user-friendly, and not necessarily because the tool is the most user-friendly in the world. It is very user-friendly, but because if you have a problem, there's usually someone who has no problem helping you because they've had the exact same problem. Plus, you can always joke that you use the pirate language. So, any other questions? Oh, let me put this back. So, if you have questions, feel free to tweet me or email me. I tend to be pretty good about answering questions. Thank you.